one dramatic enough to make a passerby pause amid the noise and chaos of an outdoor market or ship landing. Murders were best, though their appeal depended on where the body had been found. The city's lower wards were serviceable, the upper ones less so, and the 6th, the poorest and most turbulent ward of all, the Bloody 6th, as it would later come to be known, meant to keep moving on down the page. Fires were excellent, shipwrecks would suffice, and scandals among the upper classes, although relatively infrequent, could be stretched out for days before readers lost interest and again ignored the newsboys' cries. This particular morning, August 21, 1835, looked especially profitable. The first item, a brief reprint about astronomy taken from a paper in Scotland, was no good at all, but it was followed in quick succession by paragraphs headlined Fires. There had been 3 of them, the best at a brewery in the 5 Points, Coroner's Office, an Englishman had accidentally walked off the dock at Broad Street and drowned, and A Narrow Escape from Death. The Navy frigate Constitution had nearly collided with a steamboat that had several of the ship's officers aboard. But none had as much sales potential as the story that led the second column, prefaced by the lines, "How sharper than a serpent's tooth it is to have a graceless child." Mr. Locke, recently brought on as editor of The Sun, seemed to have an affection for Shakespeare. This story, which took up nearly the whole column, related the misfortunes of a prosperous gentleman from one of the state's western counties who had recently come to New York in search of his daughter. The girl had stolen $300 and a valuable gold watch from her parents and run away to the city with a young man. The couple had been spotted by a friend of the man's in a Greenwich Street boarding house, where they had apparently been posing as husband and wife. Mr. Locke was known to be one of the city's finest paragraphists, and he had been sure to note up front that the older man searching for the girl wasn't her actual father. The daughter, it is true, was the offspring of an indiscretion of her mother before she was married, and long prior to her first acquaintance with her present husband. But the knowledge of her mother's early imprudence, and the sad lesson its results, and the mortification and misery which followed in its train, were so eminently calculated to instill, appears not only to have been wholly lost upon her unhappy girl, but rather to have inflamed than allayed the unfortunate viciousness of her disposition, and to have hurried her on to, it is most probable, the consummation of her own early and utter ruin. The girl and her beau had still not been found, which promised further updates, and the boys purchased their papers that morning, confident of their sale. Years later, having long since gone on to other trades, the newsboys would recall this as the day they had, without even knowing it, come into a fortune. Because for the next few weeks, at least for those boys who didn't throw away their coins on cards or dice or lottery tickets, they had been able to bypass Buttercake Dick's and eat at any of the dozens of oyster sellers around town. Not until summer had ended was it legal to eat oysters in New York, and so for the next week they made do with clam and crab, but on the 1st of September, with the papers still selling in dazzling numbers, they tucked into oysters each night, slurped them icy from their shells, then ordered them boiled, fried, steamed, stewed, tossed into omelets and simmered in soups. And when they grew tired of oysters, they ate shad, and better yet, after eating their fill, they only had to walk upstairs, not back onto the street, because they now had coins enough in their pockets to rent a real bed for the night. And all this unexpected good fortune had come not from the brewery fire or the young runaway, or indeed from any of the unhappiness that typically brought improved sales. Rather, it had been that astronomical item out of Scotland, which in the coming weeks would develop into the most spectacular series of their careers, as the Sun's newly purchased steam-powered presses labored around the clock to meet the public's demand. All of it had arisen from that single sentence, prefaced by the simple headline, Celestial Discoveries. The Edinburgh Current says, "We have just learned from an eminent publisher in this city that Sir John Herschel, at the Cape of Good Hope, has made some astronomical discoveries of the most wonderful description by means of an immense telescope of an entirely new principle."